Okay, so we are continuing in week one's content, but we are moving on to your textbooks, chapter 2, which is all about the historical and social context of nursing. Again, I will follow your book as a rough guide. There will be things I leave out and things I include, but I will help you focus your study efforts. Sometimes in a course like this that's not clinically based, it is a little bit tougher to know what to study. I will guide you, have no fear. Um, so we're going to start at the birth of our profession. Now, people have always had some mechanism to care for the sick, the disabled, the dying, and women in childbirth. But in terms of it being a clearly articulated profession with a body of knowledge and a professional standard, we're really looking at Florence Nightingale in the mid 19th century and other women around that same time. You're going to base your early nurse leader on some folks. I did not talk about each and every one of them. That's going to be up to you during the early nurse leaders presentation for this course. Now, I have a confession to make before we start. I have a love-hate thing with Florence. She gave a lot to this profession. We would not be here without her. But she also gave a lot of things that maybe turned into a little bit of a toxic vibe within our profession. We're going to actually talk about that in this presentation. If I get long-winded, I am sorry. It's only because I have a lot to say on the subject. So Florence Nightingale was born with a silver spoon in her mouth in Victorian England, and she had her first nurses training in Kaiserswerth, Germany, under a group of Protestant nurses who were affiliated with the church. I think it was a Lutheran church, but I could be wrong. And then she went on to Paris and trained under the Catholic Sisters of Charity. Up until this time, healthcare, nursing care was really relegated to religious organizations and the military battlefield nursing, which was very rudimentary. So she got her training from those folks, and they were very strict and very rigorous. It was unusual for a woman of her status at that time to pursue this profession, but Florence had always had a sort of altruistic, inspirational, do-gooder kind of nature. In 1854, war broke out in the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine. Now, the Crimean War was sort of like the Vietnam of its time. It started out with a lot of support. It was a little spat that started between Napoleon and Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia. And in the beginning, Britain went to assist France in the war efforts. There was a lot of support for it. And then it became very unpopular as people started to realize just how badly managed and how ill-advised participation in this war was. So you were 10 times more likely, if you were a soldier in the Crimean War, particularly a British soldier, to die of something you caught in the hospital than you were to die from the wounds you received on the battlefield. The most common surgery that they did was amputation. There was lots of it. Most people didn't survive that. The conditions were deplorable. Hygiene was unheard of. People weren't emptying those chamber pots, which were right next to the bed when they were doing the dressing changes. So as these conditions became publicized, Florence was both appalled and moved to action. She went over to Crimea at first. They would not let her in. This is no place for a lady. Her and her acolytes, her little group of aspiring nurses, were not allowed in. She said, well, if you won't let us touch the patients, we can mop your floors. And I guess they couldn't really say no to that since the field hospitals were filthy. And who's going to turn you down when you offer to mop the floors? Over time, as she became a trusted figure around the camps, lady with the lamp, they allowed her nurses to do more, to bathe patients, to turn them, to change their sheets, and finally to provide wound care. Survival rates went up. Amputation rates went down. You didn't see these conditions of gangrene and maggots in wounds. And so Florence collected data. She was the first nursing researcher, and she showed that she and her group of nurses were reducing morbidity and mortality. They were sending more people home healthy than sending them home as bodies in bags or as triple amputees or what have you. In 1859, after the war was over, she wrote her famous book, Notes on Nursing, What It Is and What It Is Not. And when you read this book, I have it downloaded to my Kindle. Anyone who wants it, I know they have it in the library. Some people are inspired by it because she does have a lot of really good quotes on what nursing is. And she was ahead of her time in envisioning the role of the nurse in patient outcomes. But there's also a lot of really Victorian morality that comes with it. A lot of harsh criticism of people who would or would not be nurses, including men, including women that she associated with lower class. She was very classist, and she was very much a proponent that women should be nurses and not men. And it kind of comes off like a mother superior type vibe, old Catholic school nursing, and she was a product of her times. But in Notes on Nursing, we have some of the basics of an emerging nursing theory to guide our science. And she was a proponent of nursing research to advance practice to get better patient outcomes. And she also, in 1860, established the first training school for nurses at St. Thomas's Hospital in London. This was a diploma model, an apprenticeship model, where nurses went to school and most of their education was done at the bedside. And it continued to be the most common model of education for nurses until the 1960s. We saw the emergence of baccalaureate programs, but most nurses got their training from diploma schools until the 1960s when community colleges opened up the associate pathway to the RN. All right, and I'm going to start clicking. These are some quotes from Florence Nightingale, and they're so inspirational. I mean, they really make you want to drink the Kool-Aid, and a lot of us did. Here's one. I attribute my success to this. I never gave or took any excuse. That's about accountability. That's what nurses need to have. I mean, it's one of the big things in our profession that makes people trust us. We are accountable. We don't give excuses for poor care. Hurts us sometimes, but for another conversation. Here's another one. So never lose an opportunity of urging a practical beginning, however small. For it is wonderful how often in such matters the mustard seed germinates and roots itself. And what she's saying there is the small things matter. You know, the little things we do for our patients to keep them comfortable or to help them learn or to support them in some way. It's all really, really important. Same thing if you're a baby nurse, you just got your license, ink is still wet. Start small, and keep growing. Very inspirational. Live life when you have it. Life is a splendid gift. There is nothing small about it. Wow. Yeah. I love you, Florence. The most important practical lesson that can be given to nurses is to teach them what to observe, how to observe, what symptoms indicate improvement, and what the reverse, which it is of importance, which are the evidence of neglect, and what kind of neglect. So she is basically coaching you through some of those NGN questions. What to observe, what's important, what's the most important thing about this patient, how to observe, what are the skills involved in assessing a patient holistically, what are the trends that tell us this patient's getting better, what tells us the patient's getting worse. We look at labs, we look at assessment findings, we look at all kinds of things that tell us. In psych, we look at behaviors. Is the patient responding to our care, or do we need to change something? So evaluating the effectiveness of care. She's teaching the nursing process in this one quote, which is of importance. So again, what's significant? What's not significant? What do you leave out of an SBAR? Which are the evidence of neglect? What did we not do that we needed to do? Or what kind of neglect? All of these things, she's teaching the nursing process. She's teaching the way nurses must think. You walk into a patient room. These are all the things that underlie thought processes. And yes, this is way ahead of her time. This is way beyond mopping floors and giving bed baths and changing sheets. This is a whole way of thinking. So she was a pioneer. Every nurse ought to be careful to wash her hands very frequently during the day. If her face too, so much the better. I really don't wash my face a lot at work. Sometimes you can't help it, get splashed with something. But hands, yes, hand hygiene. She was a big proponent of it. And this is a time when hand hygiene really was not considered as important as it is today. She didn't have the benefit of and advanced microbiology science that she knew. To understand God's thoughts, one must study statistics, the measure of his purpose. So she understood the importance of collecting data and analyzing that data to draw conclusions that were important. That's, again, way ahead of her times. And then this last one: what cruel mistakes are sometimes made by benevolent men and women in matters of business about which they can know nothing and think they know a great deal. It does describe some hospital administrators I know. So you can see why I want to drink this Kool-Aid. However, there is a hangover. Here is the other side of Florence's legacy. Florence's views in the 19th century. She was shaped by her culture, and she was probably fairly pragmatic and understood how the culture would view nurses. She had this view that only women should care for the sick. Men just don't have that caring touch. They're rough, they're loud, they don't understand the needs of patients, they're dirty, whatever. Um, Read notes on nursing for yourself and see if you agree with me. Maybe you don't, it's okay. And the impact that this had on contemporary nursing is that we still struggle with this gender imbalance where 90% of our nurses are female, and we can't recruit men into this profession no matter how hard we try. When we do recruit men, they usually go away from the bedside and into expanded roles like management or nurse anesthetist or nurse practitioner, because nursing is seen as women's work and has been for centuries. That is a problem. She did not admit women of color into her training schools. Oh, we're going to talk about that when we discuss Mary Seacole, who was an amazing force in nursing. Nursing desperately needs a more diverse workforce. We know that when our nurses represent our patient populations, the outcomes improve for everybody. We reduce the implicit bias of healthcare practitioners. We still can't get people into the profession who represent our patients. And there are systemic barriers to recruiting people from diverse backgrounds that exist, and we're trying to break them down, but it's hard. The push for the baccalaureate, for example, we get to that unit, we talk about Linda Aiken's article, maybe we can discuss some of that. She kind of preached this submission to physician authority, that we shouldn't overstep our roles, and in the sense that she's advocating a scope of practice that's important. We do need to stay in our scope of practice. However, I think the hangover there is that nursing's voice got silenced for a number of centuries because physicians were seen as the authorities and nurses were seen as the handmaids. She had a harsh and critical tone with her trainees, and she was very moralistic. The Lady with the Lamp Image, it's interesting. There's a book out where one author suggests that the reason she did those nightly rounds with the lamp was not that she was being an angel of mercy, but that she was checking to make sure that her trainees were not jumping into bed or drinking with the soldiers they were taking care of. And she did have sort of this superior, derogatory tone towards new nurses. And we are still looking at a nursing profession that, in most cases, involves a little bit of bullying from senior nurses to junior nurses. And I skipped this one: inspired nurses to sacrifice selves. And yes, this country desperately needs people who are willing to put values above personalities and sometimes go above and beyond. We need that. However, it's been exploited so that nurses are denied basic self-care, the ability to care for themselves. They have to work long hours. Sometimes you go 12 hours without a bathroom break. Sometimes it's 16. Sometimes you don't get a chance to eat. Sometimes your family life suffers because you can't achieve that work-life balance because you're so torn to this idea that a nurse never says no. It gets exploited, believe me, by employers who want to increase their bottom line by understaffing. So that is the hangover from Florence. I'm going to talk a little bit about Mary Seacole, and then I'm going to give you guys a break because I know I'm talking a lot. But Mary Seacole was a nurse from Jamaica, and she was a businesswoman prior to nursing. She was voted the greatest Black Breton. Not entirely sure how to say the word Breton. I hope I said it right. By other people of that time. Now, she was a contemporary. She worked during the Crimean War in the same role, but she had to open her own field hospital because she was rejected by Nightingale several times. She kept reapplying to her training school and kept getting rejected. No, thanks, we don't need you. And it turned out it wasn't because she wasn't qualified or because she wasn't capable or because she lacked the means to support herself during her education, but because she was Black. And she was brilliant. The descriptions of Mary Seacole by people who worked alongside of her describe her as tireless and selfless and having a tender touch that all patients responded to. She got right in the trenches with her group of nurses and became an expert on cholera, which was rampant. Cholera was something they caught in the hospitals, not on the battlefield. And she managed the care of many soldiers in Crimea. She did it at her own expense and later declared bankruptcy. She spent all of her own money doing this and really established a caring framework for nurses. So that's Mary Seacole. We're going to take a little bit of a break here, and I'll start up with another video where we discuss the rest of history, and then you'll have one more on social contact.